At 6:42 in the morning on March 4, 1911, 4 men stood in the cold Denver air beside a machine that nobody believed could survive the journey ahead. The truck weighed 4,200 pounds empty. Its 37-horsepower engine sputtered and coughed blue smoke. Behind them, 4 tons of Douglas fir lumber sat stacked in the cargo bed, covered by canvas. The men called it the Pioneer Freighter. Engineers from the Saurer Motor Truck Company called it a gamble. William Fischer was 31, a mechanic from Plainfield, New Jersey. He'd worked on every Saurer truck that rolled off the assembly line. Standing next to him was Robert Harmon, the company's chief test driver, 28 years old. The other 2 were James Kelley and Charles Davis, hired for their experience with freight wagons through mountain passes. None had driven a motor truck farther than 200 miles. The plan was strange. Most cross-country journeys started in New York, ended in San Francisco. Maximum publicity. The Saurer Company started in Denver. They chose the hardest part first: the Rocky Mountains, the Utah Desert, the Mojave. If the truck failed in the wilderness, nobody would know. If it succeeded, they'd announce it halfway through and claim victory. The strategy of men who didn't quite believe in their own machine. Fischer climbed into the driver's seat. The steering wheel sat on the right side. He pulled the choke, turned the crank, and the engine caught. Black smoke poured from the exhaust. The truck shuddered, then rolled forward, iron-rimmed wheels grinding against dirt, and Denver fell away. The road west wasn't a road at all. It was a wagon trail, 2 parallel ruts carved by freight wagons hauling supplies to mining camps. The ruts ran 3 feet apart, perfect for horse-drawn wagons. The Pioneer Freighter's wheels were 4 feet apart. Fischer had to straddle one rut, letting the other wheel ride high ground. The truck bounced and lurched. By noon, they'd covered 47 miles and broken 2 wheel spokes. Under this video, you'll see a subscribe button, a small action with a big meaning. Back to the mountains, they climbed into the Rockies through March snow. At 8,000 feet, the carburetor starved for oxygen and the truck slowed to walking speed. Fischer adjusted the fuel mixture by ear, listening to the engine's rhythm. The men walked alongside on steep grades, sometimes pushing when the wheels spun on ice. Near Georgetown, they hit their first real obstacle. A section of trail had washed out, leaving a gap 8 feet wide and 3 feet deep. No bridge, no detour. They unloaded half the lumber, carried it across by hand, then cut pine logs from the forest and laid them across like railroad ties. A temporary bridge. It took 11 hours to build. Fischer drove across at 2 miles per hour. The logs creaked. One cracked, but held. They reloaded and continued west. They'd lost a full day. The Saurer Company had given them no deadline. The journey would take however long it took. In Utah, the landscape opened into high desert. Sagebrush and alkali flats stretched to the horizon. The temperature hit 94 degrees. Water became the problem. The radiator held 4 gallons and boiled every 30 miles in the heat. They carried extra water in steel jerry cans, but each gallon weighed 8 pounds. They rationed carefully, splitting it between radiator and canteens. The roads were worse than the mountains. Deep sand in some places, hardpan in others. When they hit sand, the wheels sank to the hubs. The men would unload, dig out the wheels with shovels, lay planks under tires, reload, and drive 20 feet before sinking again. Outside Provo, they covered 3 miles in 9 hours. At night, they camped beside the truck. Fischer cooked beans over sagebrush fires. They slept on the ground using lumber as windbreaks, wrapped in wool blankets that smelled like diesel and dust. The men took turns on watch, not for animals, but for the truck. Temperature dropped 40 degrees after sunset. Metal contracted, springs could snap, bolts could shear. Each morning, the Fischer walked a complete circle around the Pioneer freighter, checking every connection before starting the engine. They reached Las Vegas on April 2nd. The town had 800 people and one garage. The owner sold them gasoline from 55-gallon drums at 20 cents per gallon. He asked how much the truck cost. Harmon told him $3,200. The man whistled. A good team of draft horses cost $400 and didn't need gasoline. Harmon just paid for the fuel and they drove west. The Mojave nearly killed them. Temperature reached 107 degrees. The road disappeared entirely in places, replaced by trackless hardpan shimmering with heat mirages. They navigated by compass and sun position. Water became critical. 1 canteen per man per day, barely enough to stay conscious. The radiator demanded more. They stopped at every ranch, every isolated homestead, begging for water. Most gave it freely. One charged 50 cents for 5 gallons. On April 9th, the engine overheated catastrophically outside Barstow. Temperature gauge showed 240 degrees. Steam hissed from every seam. Fischer shut it down immediately. A cylinder head gasket had blown. Without a replacement, the journey was over. They were 127 miles from Los Angeles. Kelley volunteered to walk into Barstow, 16 miles. He carried 2 canteens and walked through the night. He reached town at dawn, found a machine shop, described what they needed. The machinist had no Saurer gasket. Nobody in California did. But he had sheet copper and asbestos cloth. He cut a gasket by hand based on Kelley's description, working from rough sketches drawn in dirt. 6 hours. Kelley paid him $8 and walked back. Fischer installed the handmade gasket by lamplight. They refilled the radiator, waited for the engine to cool, and tried to start it at midnight when the desert air was coldest. The engine turned over, caught, ran rough at first, then smoothed out. They didn't celebrate. They just started driving. Los Angeles appeared on April 12, 1911, 39 days after leaving Denver. The Pioneer freighter rolled in trailing a plume of dust visible for miles. The odometer showed 1,089 miles. The men looked like prospectors, bearded and sunburned, clothes stiff with salt. They drove to the Saurer dealership on South Main Street. A photographer from the Los Angeles Times arrived within an hour. He shot pictures of the truck, the men, the lumber still strapped in the bed. The newspaper ran it on page 3, headline, "Motor Truck Conquers Desert." 200 words. It noted the journey proved motorized freight hauling was viable even on primitive roads. It didn't mention the blown gasket, the makeshift bridge, or the days digging out of sand. The Saurer Motor Truck Company announced the achievement in a press release. They emphasized reliability and durability. They didn't mention the company had merged with Mack Brothers 2 months before reaching Los Angeles, or that they'd started in Denver to minimize risk. Marketing was about controlling the narrative. Fischer and crew drove from Los Angeles to San Francisco 2 weeks later, completing the full demonstration. That leg was easier, better roads, more towns. The San Francisco papers gave it more coverage. The photograph of the truck on the ferry crossing the bay became famous, reproduced in trade magazines for years. But the real achievement was those first 1,089 miles, the mountains and deserts, the improvisation and stubbornness. 4 men in a truck everyone expected to fail, succeeding through refusal to quit. They didn't change transportation overnight. Railroads still moved 90% of freight in 1911. Horses outnumbered motor vehicles 50-1. But the pioneer freighter proved long-haul trucking was possible. Not easy, not profitable, but possible. Within 10 years, thousands of trucks made cross-country runs. By 1920, motor trucks hauled more freight than railroads in urban areas. Infrastructure followed, roads improved, gas stations appeared. Mechanics learned engines instead of horseshoes. American commerce shifted, driven by the fact that a truck could go anywhere a wagon could, but faster and farther. Fischer stayed with the company, eventually becoming chief engineer at Mack Trucks. He designed the AC model that earned Mack its bulldog reputation during World War I. Harmon became a test driver for multiple manufacturers, punishing vehicles to breaking points on test tracks and mountain passes. Kelley and Davis returned to civilian freight hauling, driving trucks across the same routes they'd pioneered, this time on paved highways with diners and repair shops every 50 miles. The pioneer freighter survived. Mack Trucks preserved it in their museum in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It's still there, restored to original condition, canvas patched but intact, the handmade copper gasket still visible if you look closely. A placard on the driver's door reads, "First transcontinental motor truck journey, Denver to San Francisco, March to April 1911. The numbers tell part of the story. 39 days, 1,089 miles on roads that barely existed, of 4 tons of cargo delivered without loss. But numbers can't capture the sound of the engine struggling at altitude, the smell of overheated metal and burning sagebrush, the sight of 4 men in the desert at midnight, betting everything on a handmade gasket cut by a stranger in Barstow. The journey changed nothing immediately and everything eventually. That's how revolutions work. Not explosions, but shifts. Not announcements, but demonstrations. 4 men drove a truck where trucks had never been. And afterward, the idea of impossibility moved a little farther west. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe. Your support helps us preserve these histories. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from.